Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So here I am in front of the statue of General William Booth in London, in the Whitechapel area. Tower Hamlets, they also call it. The towers are like tower blocks. Anyway, so General Booth, as is known, was born in the English Midlands, grew up in a family without much money or social connections. He left school in his early teens, as was the norm then, and did a number of well-paid jobs. He was brought up as a Christian, as about 99% of the people in this country were at the time, and of the Protestant denomination, but a non-conformist, not an Anglican. He found the Anglican Church too snobbish. He thought that many of the non-conformist churches, the Quakers, the Baptists, the Methodists, and so on, the Congregationists, were too cold and were not doing enough for the needy. So he moved down to London, and here in July 1865 he began his mission. And he read somewhere else another Christian apologist talking about forming an army for the Lord, and there's a phrase that stuck with him, and he thought, well, let's actually do that. An army not in the military sense, but the sense of discipline and a sense of mission. So they went about evangelizing with a purpose, and the idea was not simply to provide persons spiritual needs, but their physical needs as well. And this is not an upscale part of London, but back in the 1860s, it was a teeming slum. There was a great deal of poverty here. We're not too far from the docks. A lot of people were casual labourers. They didn't know they had work one day to the next, and could scarcely keep body and soul together. Were often wearing rags. They were barefoot children. Such wages as men earned were often spent in a pub. Some unscrupulous employers would agree to meet their labourers on a Friday evening or a Saturday evening in the pub and pay them in the pub, and saying, won't you stay for a drink now? Come on, don't be a miser. Your wife wants you to go home and give her money so you can buy food for your children. Oh, are you going to let that little woman boss you about? Are you a man or what? You wear the trousers, don't you? Stay and have a drink. Don't be a miser, be macho. And they'd often be in cahoots with the publican who'd be giving this boss a few free bevies for doing this. But anyway, so he saw a lot of squalor here and a lot of privation, and he was sworn to do something about it. So, and he was preaching to waifs and strays. He was thought he must be like our Saviour, not be too proud to speak to prostitutes or thieves or whoever, and try and say that, you know, the good news is for you too, that redemption and salvation are possible, even for the hopeless sinner, but try and persuade people to turn away from their life of iniquity when they followed the straight and narrow path. Now, it's not a path I follow myself, but I do have a certain admiration for the man. So, the Salvation Army, they started wearing uniforms, they gave out ranks, and he appointed himself general. And if you're a soldier of the Salvation Army, you must have no addictions. Their church building is called a citadel, and so anyone can go and worship in their church. But if you become a soldier, you must have no addictions. You must have not given up alcohol, drugs, gambling, tobacco, prostitution, pornography, any of these vices. Now, an ordinary person can go along who indulges in all these things. They try to courteously persuade you to turn away from your life of sin, but you're still welcome there because they are trying to help. So they do a lot of very laudable work with down and outs, with mentally ill people, with battered wives, with abused children, runaways, whoever. And so, as we are close to the docks, a lot of people who are flotsam and jetsam fetched up here because they were refugees or they were economic migrants arriving here, often unable to speak English, often illiterate even in their own language. So they had a very tough time in the rat race here, trying to get a job and make ends meet. Could often be exploited, there being no minimum wage at the time. The late 19th century, there was quite a lot of Jewish immigration from the Russian Empire, from the Pale of Settlement, we now call it the Ukraine and Belarus, more so Latvia and Lithuania, and they came here and they faced anti-Semitism. So he would try and help them, nourish them and so forth, try to persuade them to turn to Christianity. I don't think any of them did, but that was that. Care was not denied to people on the grounds of their faith. I mean, most people here were nominal Christians, but some of them never went to church, didn't read the Bible, and that's that. But he wanted them to become zealous Christians like himself. So he's married, he had several children, and some of the criticisms that were levelled at him is that this was a lot of it was about self-aggrandizement, styling himself general. And if a suitor approached him asking for his daughter's hand in marriage, General Booth would say, well, I shall consent with the proviso that you append my surname to yours. And they all did. And indeed, when he died, he ensured that his son took over as commissioner, which is head of the Salvation Army internationally. And by the time he died, around the turn of the century, it was the Salvation Army was in many different countries. He'd met Queen Victoria towards the end of his life. So he'd become quite a respectable figure. First of all, he'd been detested by the church, as by law established, the Church of England, who saw him as a rival, as a dangerous agitator. He wasn't actually political, even though he cared very much about social justice. So that's that. Obviously, it exists in the United States, many Western countries, Germany. They believe in using music a lot. You see their brass bands playing outside. I've even seen some of their sort of Remembrance Day service at the Cenotaph once on Oxford Street. You can see one of their citadels there. One of the addictions they don't object to is caffeine. So that still carries on, the Salvation Army. And recently, the very first woman became the commissioner of the Salvation Army. And every 10 years, they have a congress. I saw it a couple of summers ago outside Buckingham Palace, like an international meeting for Salvation Army activists from all over the world. So the Salvation Army will also supply affordable places for people to stay, on the rule that there's sort of no drugs, no alcohol, no pets, things like that, and believe in respectable behaviour. So there's a distant relative of Cherie Blair. Her maiden name was Booth, but don't let that put you off. He's still a very honourable man, despite what his great-great-grandniece has got up to. So here's Catherine Booth, General Booth's good wife. So his helpmeet was very much involved in the organisation as well. So they're trying to persuade people to donate to this cause. But the thing is, he lived in considerable comfort. Opulence might be too strong a word. And this was another accusation that levelled at him that to some extent this was a scam. This was for him to live well as him to be a bit of a Pharisee. And you can see images of it up there. General Booth with his large beard and his uniform on, saying Salvation Army on it, trying to save people. Various images from this end of London. And there we are into here, the Tower Hamlets mission. It's not very large or impressive. You can't see very much through the gate. So happily, there is not so much privation in Tower Hamlets anymore. Okay, that's enough. I'll switch it off.